At precisely noon on October 13th, AD 52, 19,000 condemned men laid down their weapons in the flooded Colosseum and waited for Emperor Claudius to honor his promise of mercy. The artificial sea around them churned crimson, littered with the debris of mock naval warfare that had raged since dawn. These weren't professional gladiators, but a mixture of prisoners of war, criminals, and slaves who had been forced to reenact the legendary Battle of Salamis for Roman entertainment. They had performed magnificently, giving the crowd exactly what it craved: authentic naval combat, complete with ramming ships, boarding parties, and the desperate chaos of men fighting for their lives on rolling decks. The Emperor's purple-draped viewing box cast its shadow across the water as the survivors stood knee-deep in the bloody lake, their improvised armor glinting in the afternoon sun. They had followed every instruction perfectly. From the ritual greeting, moratori, te salutant, those who are about to die, salute you, to the carefully choreographed battle sequences that recreated one of history's most famous naval victories. Now came the moment of truth. Would Rome keep its word? The answer came not in words but in the brazen call of imperial horns, not the notes of mercy they expected, but the signal to resume combat. Panic rippled through 19,000 throats as Praetorian archers appeared along the arena's edge, arrows already nocked. The Emperor's promise had been theater, just another act in the show. What followed was not combat, but systematic slaughter, as guards began firing into the mass of exhausted men who moments before had believed they'd earned their freedom through perfect obedience. This moment of ultimate betrayal represents the horrifying endpoint of a transformation that had taken Rome 3 centuries to complete: the evolution from modest funeral rites into industrialized death entertainment. To understand how the world's most advanced civilization reached this point of mechanized cruelty, we must journey back to a simple funeral in 264 BC, where 3 pairs of slaves first crossed swords in what their master called a munus, a duty to honor the dead. The bronze blade scraped against stone as the first gladiator in Roman history collapsed at that long-ago funeral. Decimus Junius Brutus Sceva had just invented what he believed was a dignified tradition to honor his deceased father. 6 slaves stood in the cleared space before the funeral pyre, their agricultural hands trembling around unfamiliar sword hilts. These weren't warriors but field workers who had shared meals, quarters, and probably friendships. Now they faced each other with weapons, commanded to fight while mourners watched. The crowd of funeral-goers shifted uncomfortably. Human sacrifice belonged to barbarians, not Romans. But Sceva assured them this was different. Not sacrifice, but sport with sacred purpose. The first pair circled each other, their breathing audible over the funeral hymns. One slave, perhaps named Marcus, kept glancing between the pyre, his opponent, and the armed guards surrounding them. The mathematics were simple: fight your friend, or die anyway. When Marcus swung first, wild and desperate, his opponent tried to dodge, but wasn't quick enough. Bronze met flesh with a sound that made the crowd gasp, not in horror but with something else entirely, something new. Blood spattered onto sacred ground as the first man fell, and the mourners who had come to weep found themselves leaning forward, transfixed. By the time all 3 fights ended, 3 men lay dead, and 3 stood panting, covered in their friend's blood. Sceva nodded with satisfaction, declaring that his father's spirit had been well served, and that the survivors would be freed. The crowd murmured approval. Here was justice and mercy balanced perfectly. Beautiful, someone whispered. The Etruscans do something similar, but this has Roman dignity. The funeral guests departed with strange energy, having arrived to mourn but leaving to discuss the fights. Who had shown courage? Who had demonstrated skill despite their lack of training? When would the next funeral offer similar entertainment? Within months, other noble families began including paired fighters in their ceremonies. Just 1 pair initially, then 2, then 3. The excuse remained religious, honoring the dead, but everyone understood the real attraction. They came for the blood. One elderly senator wrote to his son, "Yesterday I attended Quintus's funeral. The gladiator contests were unsettling, yet I find myself thinking about them constantly. There was something pure in those desperate struggles, something true." These words spread through Rome's elite, like wine staining cloth. The term munus evolved beyond mere duty to the dead, now meaning the gift of violence wrapped in piety. Within decades, what had begun as private grief would transform into public addiction, and the innocent word would take on meanings that would horrify even its creators. By 216 BC, barely 50 years after that first funeral fight, the transformation was accelerating rapidly. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus stood before the Senate, sweat beading beneath his toga as he negotiated death as campaign strategy. 20 pairs, he insisted. My opponent promises 15. The people expect more. The shift had been swift and decisive. What began as private funeral rites had mutated into political currency. Every ambitious Roman now understood that votes could be bought with blood. But one ambitious edile was about to change everything forever. Gaius Scribonius Curio faced a serious problem in 53 BC. He needed to become consul, but his wealth was moderate and his military glory non-existent. His solution would reshape Rome's relationship with death forever. I'll build something new, Curio told his advisors excitedly. 2 wooden theaters, back to back. During the day, we'll use them as separate stages for plays. But watch this, they rotate. The theaters spin on pivots and join into one great oval, an amphitheater specifically for gladiators. His architect paled. The engineering alone will bankrupt you. Curio's eyes gleamed. I know, but imagine 5,000 Romans watching 50 pairs of gladiators fight, not at some funeral, just because we want them to. When Curio announced his games to the Senate, the chamber erupted. Madness, old Cato shouted. Fighting without religious purpose, it's sacrilege. But Senator Publius stood slowly and delivered words that would echo through history. Colleagues, the people love these contests. Why shouldn't the state provide what they desire? Consider it, public welfare. Asterisk, the vote was unanimous. Democracy had just voted for mass murder. Within a decade, every political career required blood offerings, ediles, praetors, consuls. Each office came with an expected death toll. Julius Caesar, still young and ambitious, borrowed ruinous sums to provide 320 pairs of gladiators for his games. His rivals whispered about bankruptcy, while the crowd whispered about his generosity. Did you hear? Citizens asked in the forums. Caesar's gladiators will have silver armor, pure silver. The mathematics of political advancement had become grotesque. One historian calculated that reaching the consulship now required causing approximately 100 deaths. The Senate didn't discuss this arithmetic openly. They focused on logistics, where to house gladiators, how to source prisoners, weapon quality standards. Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great orator and philosopher, wrote to a friend, I attended yesterday's games, given by young Pompey. 3 hours, 60 deaths. The crowd was transported. I fear what we're becoming. His friend wrote back, but you attended, didn't you? Asterisk, the state had discovered something darker than bread and circuses. They had found that shared bloodshed created shared identity. When 50,000 Romans screamed together as a gladiator fell, they became one organism, with one will, easy to direct, easy to control. Career advancement was no longer measured in speeches or laws, but in body counts. Asterisk, deep beneath Rome's arenas, a new profession had emerged that would perfect the science of suffering. The bestiari, not the fighters, but the keepers, understood that natural predators weren't cruel enough for Roman entertainment. They needed enhancement through systematic starvation and conditioning. Titus Flavius worked the cages for 20 years, keeping detailed notes on the precise timing required for reliable animal aggression. Lions require 7 days minimum starvation for reliable attack, he recorded. Bears only 4, they're naturally angrier. Leopards are unpredictable. Sometimes they play with prey too long, and the crowd grows bored. The science was exact. Too hungry animals became lethargic, not hungry enough, and they might ignore condemned prisoners entirely. One disaster in 62 AD saw a well-fed lion lie down next to a Christian prisoner and sleep. The crowd rioted, and the beastmaster was fed to his own animals the next day. But the prisoners had learned something the guards didn't expect. Word traveled through Rome's dungeons faster than plague. and those scheduled for damnatio began developing countermeasures. Some starved themselves to weakness, hoping animals would find them uninteresting. Others exercised obsessively, believing fit prey might successfully fight back. Marcus the thief, who had survived 3 years in the dungeons, taught newcomers. They spray you with blood, first animal blood, to make you smell like food. But if you roll in your own waste first, ... Does it work? A young prisoner asked. Marcus showed his scars. I'm still here. The beastmasters adapted quickly, beginning to mix aromatic oils with the blood spray and testing different combinations on slaves. They kept detailed charts of which scents triggered which animals most effectively. One keeper's journal survived. Tried lamb's blood, mixed with honey on subject 12. The bear's reaction was immediate and thorough. Recommend for future use. Science was serving sadism with methodical precision. Julius Caesar's vision for spectacle reached its zenith when he decided to stage actual naval warfare in the heart of Rome. 10,000 slaves spent 6 months digging what they believed was a reservoir, unaware they were excavating their own arena. Caesar stood at the edge of the massive basin, his purple cloak whipping in the wind as the excavation stretched wider than the Forum and deeper than a 3-story building. Engineers buzzed around him with measurements and calculations for what would be his masterpiece, not of war, but of entertainment. How many ships? Caesar asked. 40 20 per side, and men, 4,000 prisoners, 2,000 per fleet. Caesar smiled with satisfaction. The Roman people had seen gladiators and beast hunts, but they had never witnessed actual naval warfare in Rome's heart, history itself, transformed into lethal theater. The prisoners knew nothing of their fate as they hauled dirt day after day, told only that Caesar was improving Rome's water supply. Some even joked about finally contributing something useful to the city. Old Brennus laughed, his Gallic accent thick as he recalled being captured at Alesia and watching Vercingetorix surrender. Now he simply dug, unaware that Caesar had a specific historical battle in mind. They'll recreate Salamis, Caesar told his advisors enthusiastically. Greeks versus Persians. The crowd knows the story. Now they'll see it performed. The preparation was meticulous, with historians consulted to ensure accuracy and shipwrights constructing Greek-style triremes and Persian vessels, complete with their distinctive decorations. Costumes were prepared so the condemned would die authentically in character. After 6 months of digging, the aqueduct connection brought the brutal revelation. The prisoners watched water rush into their excavation, many still not understanding, until guards explained their fate. They would board ships, they would fight, and the last crew floating would supposedly live. Caesar's promise, but I'm no sailor, someone protested. A guard laughed coldly. You'll learn quickly, or die quickly. The absurdity struck them in. Waves, Gauls, forced to play Greeks, Germans cast as Persians, all performing a battle from centuries past for Roman entertainment. History had become a death sentence, with training that was brief and brutal. Several drowned during practice sessions, which the trainers dismissed as acceptable losses. When the day arrived, 40,000 Romans surrounded the artificial lake, while Caesar's box dominated the eastern shore in blazing purple and gold. The water was pristine blue, but wouldn't remain so for long. Horns announced the start, as 2 fleets rode out with banners, flying Greeks to the north, Persians to the south. 4,000 men who had never asked to be actors in Caesar's historical drama faced each other across the artificial sea. The crowd exploded as the first ram struck home, splintering wood and sending men screaming into the water. This wasn't imitation but real naval combat with genuine casualties. The precision of historical Salamis dissolved into chaotic survival as Brennus, dressed as a Greek hoplite, drove his spear through a Persian who had been his cellmate. The man's shocked, betrayed eyes would haunt Brennus for the few hours he had left to live. By sunset, only 3 ships remained, floating with 200 survivors out of 4,000. Caesar, magnanimous in victory, granted them all pardons. To thunderous crowd approval. Such mercy, such justice. As slaves drained the lake that night, pulling hundreds of corpses from pink water, Caesar was already planning expansions. Next time, he told his secretary, We need a permanent venue. This was just the beginning. Augustus Caesar inherited his uncle's vision, but engineered it into permanent infrastructure. Where Julius had improvised a basin, Augustus built the naumachia, not just bigger but a permanent scar on Earth itself. The numbers defied comprehension. 1,800 feet long, 1,200 feet wide, an artificial lake that could hold 30 full-sized warships. But the true innovation was invisible. An entire aqueduct. The Aqua Alsitina, built solely to flood this arena of death. Lead engineer Vitruvius documented everything with mathematical precision, applied to mass murder. Water flow rates were calculated to fill the basin in exactly 6 hours. Drainage systems were designed to remove bodies efficiently. Viewing platforms were engineered to prevent crowd crushes when 200,000 Romans attended simultaneously. The technical challenges fascinated Rome's finest minds. How deep should water be for authentic naval combat while remaining shallow enough for corpse retrieval? Vitruvius settled on 12 feet, deep enough to drown, shallow enough for cleanup crews. The first full-scale naumachia, under Augustus, recreated the Battle of Actium, his own victory over Antony and Cleopatra. 30 ships per side carried 6,000 condemned men, many of whom were veterans of the actual battle, now forced to reenact their defeat. After 3 hours of combat, a new problem emerged. Blood and bodies fouled. The water so badly that ships could barely move through the thickening liquid. Augustus's engineers worked through the night, installing revolutionary underground pipes that could pump fresh water in while draining contaminated fluid. A preserved maintenance manual detailed the procedures. Begin fresh water flow after first hour of combat. Increase flow rate proportional to casualty estimates, full drainage, and refill between morning and afternoon shows. The infrastructure of death had achieved new sophistication. The Colosseum's grand opening in AD 80, under Emperor Titus, promised spectacles beyond imagination. And the crowd of 50,000 had already witnessed hours of beast hunts and gladiator battles. But now came something unprecedented. Mythology brought to lethal life. A condemned man named Alexios, a Greek prisoner chosen for his musical ability, had performed Orpheus's songs at weddings in his homeland. Now he would die as Orpheus for Roman entertainment. They dressed him perfectly in flowing white robes, with a golden lyre and laurel crown. From the emperor's box, you might actually believe Orpheus himself had materialized in the arena. The crowd hushed as Alexios began to play, his fingers finding familiar melodies. Songs of love transcending death, of music taming wild nature. Children in the crowd knew the myth and tugged their father's togas. But father, Orpheus charms all animals with his music. That's the story. Their fathers shifted uncomfortably. Sometimes ... Sometimes stories need updating. The bear that emerged from its hidden door weighed 400 pounds of engineered hunger. In the myth, Orpheus's music would soothe the beast, making it lie peacefully at his feet. Alexios played louder, fingers flying across strings in a desperate, beautiful plea to whatever gods might listen. The bear paused, perhaps confused by the noise, and for one moment myth and reality aligned. Then training overcame instinct. The bear had been conditioned. Man plus arena equals food. It charged, while Alexios kept playing until the very last second. Witnesses swore the music continued, even as claws struck flesh, though that was likely imagination. What wasn't imagined was the sound of strings snapping, mixed with screams that harmonized horribly with the lyre's final notes. The court poet Martial watched from patrician seats, his stylus moving across wax tablets. By evening, his epigrams circulated through Rome's elite. Orpheus charmed all nature in the stories of old. But in Caesar's arena, the bear was unmoved by song. Perhaps our beasts are deafer than myth told, or perhaps our Orpheus simply wasn't good enough. The bitter humor masked a darker truth. Rome hadn't just killed a man, but murdered meaning itself. Every child who had loved the Orpheus tale now carried a new ending burned into memory. Nero elevated execution to art form with his tunica molesta. The troublesome shirt, a masterpiece of cruelty that was part punishment, part performance, pure horror, disguised as justice. The process was methodical. Condemned prisoners were stripped and coated with wax, then fitted with shirts woven from coarse fabric and soaked in pitch, sulfur, and resin. The mixture was precisely calculated to burn hot enough to ensure death, but slow enough to ensure spectacle. In Nero's gardens, special poles were erected at artistic intervals, with landscape architects ensuring proper spacing for optimal viewing. Too close and heat drove spectators back. Too far, and you lost visceral impact. Guards learned to plug their noses during preparation. And Marcus Flavius served on the execution squad for 3 years before requesting transfer. In his memoir, discovered centuries later, he wrote, "The worst wasn't the burning. It was the preparation painting pitch on living flesh while they pleaded. Many guards drank heavily. I chose reassignment." One victim's final words would haunt even the executioners. Claudia, a Christian seamstress accused of insulting Roman gods, spoke clearly as guards prepared her flaming shirt. "You dress me in flame, but clothe yourselves in shame. My pain ends tonight. Your guilt burns forever." The guard applying pitch. A young man named Gaius stopped mid-stroke until his commander barked orders to continue, though his hands shook visibly as Claudia burned at Nero's party that night. Never screaming once, Gaius watched from his post. Within a week, he had disappeared. Some said desertion, others whispered conversion. His replacement found a note in the barracks. "I've painted my last innocent with pitch. Let Rome find other hands for its horrors." Even Rome's greatest moral teacher couldn't escape corruption. Lucius Annaeus, Seneca's Stoic philosopher and advisor to attended the games not for elaborate spectacles, but for noon executions. Pure slaughter, without pretense. He wrote to his friend Lucilius with trembling hand, "I happened to drop in at midday expecting sport and wit and relaxation. It was just the reverse. The morning's combat was merciful compared to this. Now there is nothing but butchery." The noon slot was reserved for Nazi criminals, with no training, no proper weapons, no hope. They were herded into the arena in groups, given rusty blades, and ordered to kill each other until none remained. The spectators demand that those who have just committed murder should be thrown to those who will commit it, Seneca continued. The victor is detained for another slaughter. The only exit is death. Despite his intellectual understanding of the game's corruption, Seneca kept attending, documenting his own moral degradation. "I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more voluptuous, even more cruel and inhuman." He watched ordinary Romans, mothers with children, merchants, priests, teachers, all leaning forward as the killing began. "You can see the guilt on their faces afterward," he noted. "Yet they return, we all return." His student Lucan wrote, "Master, I've memorized your letter about the game's corrupting influence. I quoted it at dinner last night. Everyone agreed. Then we all went to watch the gladiators. What is wrong with us?" Seneca's reply cut to the heart of Rome's moral collapse. "What's wrong is that we've made vice into virtue, brutality into bravery, murder into morality. We've inverted every value we claim to hold so completely that even seeing it clearly changes nothing. The systematic persecution of Christians transformed from political necessity into elaborate theatrical productions where faith itself became combustible material. After Rome's Great Fire in AD 64, Nero needed scapegoats, and Christians proved perfect, mysterious enough to fear, peaceful enough to capture easily, numerous enough to provide sustained entertainment. But something unexpected happened when mass executions began. Christians refused to follow the script. Traditional condemned prisoners begged, cursed, and fought, providing the emotional journey audiences expected. Christians broke the narrative by praying for their executioners, singing, and smiling. One frustrated arena announcer reportedly shouted, "These Christians refuse to entertain properly. They die like they're going somewhere better." The more peacefully they died, the more creative executions became. But each escalation backfired. A young woman named Perpetua wrote the night before her execution, "Tomorrow I fight beasts in the arena, but I've already won. They can kill this body, it's temporary anyway. My true life begins at death." She entered the arena carrying her infant daughter, handed the child to a watching Christian, then faced leopards with arms spread wide. The crowd expecting maternal hysteria got maternal transcendence instead. and many left disturbed. One young mother's final act would convert her executioner. Blandina, a slave girl from Gaul, endured tortures that made hardened soldiers vomit. Burned with hot irons, mauled by beasts, hung on stakes. Throughout it all, she repeated, "I am a Christian. We do nothing wrong." When the executioner assigned to finish her, a veteran named Taurus who had killed hundreds, approached with his sword, Blandina looked up through streaming blood and said, "You look tired, friend. This burden must be heavy. Know that I forgive you, and my God loves you." Taurus's sword shook. He had been called many things by the condemned, but never friend, never forgiven. The stroke went wide, requiring 3 attempts. That night Taurus disappeared into Rome's Christian underground, leaving only a conversion note. "She called me friend while I killed her." What God teaches such love? Meanwhile, 200 men worked pulleys and pipes beneath the sand, never seeing the deaths they enabled. The Colosseum's hypogeum was Rome's greatest engineering marvel, not for what it built, but for what it hid. Beneath the killing floor stretched a labyrinth of chambers and corridors, an underground city dedicated to delivering death efficiently. Slaves operated elevators that lifted beasts into sunlight, manned pulleys that raised scenery, and controlled pipes that could flood the arena for naval battles. Marcus Quintus supervised Section 7 for 5 years, his logbook preserving the mundane horror. Tuesday Elevator 3 jammed with lion halfway up. Beast agitated, lost 2 men extracting it. Wednesday blood seepage from above, contaminating gear mechanisms, requested sand replacement, denied as too expensive. The workers developed their own culture of never speaking about what happened above, referring only to the performance. During a test flood for an upcoming naumachia, Chief Hydraulic Engineer Gaius Maximus activated his masterpiece, pipes that could fill the arena in 2 hours. As water rushed through channels and valves opened in sequence, screaming echoed from Section 12 where 20 slaves maintaining beast cages had no warning. Water burst through drainage grates, filling narrow corridors as exit doors. Designed to seal during floods activated automatically. Gaius heard pounding fists against bronze doors, and increasingly desperate cries as water rose. "Release the seals," he shouted. "Can't," his assistant replied. "Would drain the arena. The Emperor is reviewing tomorrow." When Gaius ran to manual overrides, his supervisor stopped him. 20 slaves or disgrace before Caesar. Which would you choose? The pounding stopped after 10 minutes. The test deemed successful. Emperor Claudius's special request would create the ultimate betrayal. Flood during the fight, not before. Let the condemned fight, while water rises around them. Transform naval combat into a race against drowning. The engineering team exchanged glances. Technically possible, but unprecedented. "What about those who can't swim?" an engineer asked. The imperial messenger shrugged. "That's rather the point." This brings us back to that October day, when 19,000 men discovered that perfect obedience couldn't save them from becoming entertainment. As imperial horns echoed across bloody water, Claudius rose in his purple toga and delivered his final betrayal. "You have entertained Rome well, but the show requires a finale worthy of your opening. Resume combat. Die gloriously. This is my mercy. A death with meaning, rather than mere execution." What followed wasn't battle, but mechanized murder, as exhausted men swung swords with dead arms, while ships rammed without strategy. Some tried swimming to shore, where auxiliary troops waited with spears to push them back. Others dove deep, choosing drowning over continued performance. But guards in small boats used poles to force them back to the surface. A Greek prisoner found energy for one last act of defiance, climbing his ship's mast to shout, "Romans, you watch us die for sport, but we are men. We had families. We had names. I am Theron of Athens, and I die naming you all murderers." An arrow found him mid-sentence as he fell into water already thick with bodies. By sunset, not one of the 19,000 lived. The emperor declared the games magnificent, while historians recorded it as a triumph of Roman entertainment. But something had shifted. Even the mob seemed subdued, leaving the arena. They had seen spectacular deaths before, but never betrayal on this scale. never such mechanized erasure of hope. Senator Cassius wrote that night, "I've attended games for 40 years. Today was different. We didn't watch men die. We watched Rome's soul drown with them." Rome fell, but not before teaching history a permanent lesson about entertainment without conscience. Today we shake our heads at Roman brutality while consuming human suffering through screens instead of arenas. The medium evolved. The appetite didn't. Seneca's words echo across centuries. Each spectacle of suffering we consume for entertainment makes us more cruel and inhuman. We just don't notice because our Colosseum is digital, our complicity distributed through views and clicks, rather than cheers. The 19,000 who died in Claudius's naumachia believed civilization meant something, that rules mattered, that obedience earned mercy. They discovered too late that when entertainment becomes more valuable than humanity, even perfect compliance can't save you from becoming content. Their bodies were burned in mass pyres outside Rome, with no names recorded, no graves marked, just statistics in an emperor's achievement log, reduced to a single line noting that Claudius provided exceptional games. But their unnamed voices carry a warning: we still refuse to hear about the transformation from citizen to spectator, from empathy to appetite, from human to consumer. It happens one entertaining atrocity at a time, until one day you realize you're not in the audience. You're in the arena.